This video will be both a review and an analysis of the 2016 indie game Firewatch. That means that the first part will be a spoiler-free discussion of the game's positives and negatives, while the rest of the video will be an in-depth look at its plot and themes. If you just want the analysis, then skip to this time frame. In the introduction to Firewatch, we meet Henry, and through a text-based choice system, we learn about his life, specifically how he met his wife Laura, and how she fell victim to dementia despite only being in her 40s. After she goes to live with her family in Australia, Henry decides to escape by taking the job of a fire lookout in Wyoming. Upon arriving at his watchtower, he starts speaking to his supervisor, Delilah, and they soon begin something of a rapport. Very early on, after telling off some partying teenagers for using fireworks, Henry is confronted with a mystery as he returns to his watchtower to discover it vandalized. This is only the start of the strange things that happen to Henry. Who did it and why set off the central conflict of the story. Firewatch is not a game that tries to be challenging. As well as being very short, I probably beat it in around 4 hours on my first go, you also can't die or even fail anything. The developers definitely had the option to make it more conventional, but chose not to. For example, the supply caches that you find could have had codes that you had to look for or figure out in some way. However, Delilah gives you the code from the start, and if you ask her, she'll tell you it again. Not only this, but it's about as basic as you could get, being 1, 2, 3, 4. This sort of simplicity is deliberate. Firewatch is what's often called a walking simulator, which I think is an incredibly boring name that does a great disservice to what it's describing. Basically, it's all about the story and atmosphere, both of which go for something that, while stylized, is also subtle and for the most part feels grounded. Of course, the art style is somewhat cartoony and at times its colours are greatly exaggerated, but for me it remains firmly trenched in reality. This is not to suggest that it's dull by any means. Firewatch's story is captivating, and the central dynamic between Delilah and Henry, whose conversations make up the majority of the game, is brilliant. Cissy Jones and Rich Sommer bring these two complicated characters to life with great energy. The game is largely carried on their shoulders, and they are more than capable of bearing the weight. Jones's Delilah especially is someone who has to make the player feel many things. We get a lot of different impressions of her throughout the game, and we can never really be sure who exactly she is. One minute we're enjoying her banter with Henry, the next we're wondering if she may be involved in a conspiracy against him. Through voice alone, Delilah manages to be likeable, funny, and seductive. Which, by the way, is also how my videos are often described. But she's also mysterious and perhaps deceptive. As well as the excellent performances, it doesn't hurt at all that the writing is brilliant. Whether it be about building the lore of the game's world, making jokes, or developing the characters' relationship and telling us more about them, you'll pretty much always find yourself engaged with the dialogue between Henry and Delilah. Their conversations, many of which are multiple choice, meaning you can play through the game several times and still hear new exchanges, really bring Firewatch to life. But they aren't the only thing that make this world immersive. There are animal encounters, so at one point a raccoon jumps out at you, and at another you can adopt a turtle. There are other animals too, though I do kind of wish there were a few more in the game. It would have been a great way to make the world feel that much more atmospheric. You can find notes exchanged between Rangers Ron and Dave, which by the end paints a rather sad story. And there are also numerous books scattered throughout with blurbs that you can read. I particularly like the detective series. A review on one of these books says that the protagonist makes Sam Spade look like Mickey Mouse, Spade being the lead character in Dashiell Hammett's The Maltese Falcon. All of this makes the world of Firewatch feel that much more alive. The visuals and music enhance this tenfold. The sights of Firewatch are, to quote the film version of The Maltese Falcon, the stuff that dreams are made of. I was entranced by the various vistas throughout, often just having to stand still and take it all in. Usually you only hear the sounds of nature around you, but music does play sporadically throughout, and it's always impactful when it does. There's a part where an 80s pop song plays on a loop on a boombox. If you want, you can carry it around for the remainder of the day. While hardly a work of art, the song is quite catchy and it has a strong summer vibe to it. Listening to that while looking at the evening sun fill the Shoshone forest and the canyon with a warm orange glow produces a feeling that not many games have been able to. It's both melancholic and nostalgic. Those are just two of many things that you'll feel while going through the world of Firewatch. Some areas are quite unsettling, others awe-inspiring. You also play at various times of the day, and this helps to keep things feeling fresh, as the look of the environment will change a bit throughout. I've sometimes seen people say that they'd prefer Firewatch as a short story or a novel or something like that, but all the things listed help argue in favour of this having to be played. Despite not being action heavy, the gameplay is still vital to the experience. It is incredibly enhanced by its medium. But that's not to say that all of it works brilliantly. Using the map to navigate around, something you'll have to do a lot, can feel a bit clunky at times. I sort of wish you had the choice to bring it full screen the way you can with documents. You have to zoom in to see where you are and use a compass to figure out which direction to head in. It felt a bit stiff, especially when trying to use the map on the move. It's not awful, and the argument can be made that it makes the experience more immersive, but it was the only thing that got in the way of an otherwise fairly brisk pace. Well, almost the only thing. While I appreciated how much you could do while listening to Henry and Delilah speak, for instance rappelling doesn't cut them off, there are times I was forced to stand around and not do much at all while waiting for the next dialogue option, which is sometimes only one option. Of course, just listening to them isn't that painful, as their exchanges have many strengths, but I do think it works better when you're actually navigating the forest rather than when you're stood around not doing much of anything. I also am not sure about some elements of the plot, which I otherwise found to be quite powerful, but we'll speak about them in the analysis section. Bringing the review part of this video to a close, I have to say that I love Firewatch and the experience it gives. It produces strong feelings with its sad story and visually stunning world, and I could listen to Henry and Delilah's conversations all day. Its short length means that I can't see a good argument for not at least giving it a go. Firewatch, for me, is an 8.5 out of 10. The plot of Firewatch, when all is said and done, is fairly mundane. What I mean is that, while there is plenty of drama, most of it is actually quite grounded. We learn that the person stalking Henry and listening to his conversations is a previous lookout called Ned, who decided to stay in the forest after his son accidentally died while illegally out there with him. He basically just wants to throw you off track from finding him and has not got any elaborate scheme in mind. Henry and Delilah's romance, or whatever there even was of it, just like the optional subplot about Ron and Dave, ultimately doesn't go anywhere. By the end, neither has done much of anything to help the forest they were supposed to be protecting, as a fire spreads out of control and they're forced to evacuate. There's an alternative theory that Delilah was a part of Ned's plans to throw you off track, and it has some solid evidence in its favour. We hear Delilah talking to someone else, possibly about you, early on, and when confronted about it, she gets defensive. This conversation could just be a red herring to throw you off track, but it's never explained either way. Delilah also acts rather unprofessionally throughout, illegally hid the fact that Brian was with Ned, possibly has a drinking problem, and perhaps shows some deception. There's a part where she gives us a new walkie-talkie to stop Ned from listening in. She refers to the old one as being tapped, but I'm informed that's not how walkie-talkies work. She says she doesn't know anything about the existence of the government-operated Wapiti station, and though it can't be seen from her lookout, presumably she wouldn't be left in the dark if the government were doing research there. She's also quick to tell us to burn it down, though maybe this is just her being nervous in the heat of the moment. She tells us at one point that the sign to Pork Pond has been stolen by people a bunch of times, while failing to mention that she was one of those people. Discovering the sign in her watchtower is probably just a nice little joke, but I think it's worth mentioning nonetheless. Finally, during the credits we see a picture taken from a disposable camera of Ned and Brian together. Someone would have had to take that photo, and Delilah was the only one there who knew about them, hinting that maybe she was closer to them than she leads on. Of course, some of these things could just be poor writing, but if you buy into the theory that Delilah was involved, which I don't by the way, then they make sense. There are three things in the story that stuck out to me as contrived, the first of these being the fact that Ned's cough alerts you that he's listening on your line. While perfectly possible that he would accidentally expose himself at some point, it just felt a bit too convenient in the moment when it happens, at exactly the right time to move the plot along. However, if you view this as part of his and Delilah's plan, then it makes a lot more sense. It's really how you interpret the story. Then there's Ned keeping hold of the key to the cave. Maybe he kept it because he would return to Brian's corpse in the way that one might visit a grave, but I think it would have made more sense for Ned to either bury it or throw it in a lake or something where no one could ever find it. It's another convenience that not only does he keep it, but he also puts an alarm next to it at a time when Henry has the tracker. I saw one theory that this is to lead Henry into the cave so he could trap him in there, but a note from Ned in his hideout suggests that he didn't want Henry to find it, so I don't buy that. The girls who set off the fireworks go missing on day 9, with them apparently not having been heard from in a week at that point. Almost 70 days after this, Delilah reveals that they are fine and that they just ended up in jail after stealing a tractor. I don't know why it took over 2.5 months for them to make some kind of contact with their family and reveal that they weren't missing. In hindsight, it just feels like a bit of a cheap way to develop some tension. So while I think that Firewatch's story is overall satisfying and definitely very engaging, I don't think it's without problems, especially since I don't buy into the Delilah theory. That being said, I do think it works brilliantly on a thematic level, but before getting onto that, I want to talk about some elements of the plot that I like. Early on, Henry's rope snaps as you're rappelling and he has a nasty fall. While this works to prevent Henry from having the rope at this point in the game, it also seems to hint at Brian's fate. As you're going past the entrance to the cave where Brian fell, Delilah mentions that it's locked to stop people from dying, and also that the keys to it were reported missing 3 years ago, which of course is when Brian and Ned were supposed to have left. In one of the caches, there is a missing person poster. The optional conversation that comes from this has Delilah say that more than a few people vanish in the Shoshone forest, after which Henry brings up Ned and Brian. It's done in such a casual way that you don't even realise that this is also foreshadowing until later on. We come across the hat of a Korean war vet, to which Delilah mentions that many veterans take up the post. We later learn that Ned is one too, so I think that this was another subtle foreshadowing. But now I want to discuss what I find most interesting about the game, that being its themes. To me, the central theme of Firewatch is about people trying to escape from and not confronting their problems. Henry can't face the fact that his wife has dementia, so after failing to run away from that through booze, he resorts to taking this job. Delilah went through a breakup, lied to her sister about what happened, and took this job to take refuge in it in a similar way to Henry. Ned can't face society after his son's death and chooses instead to become a hermit. Dave never expresses the love it's implied that he has for Ron, and he is yet another character who took the job to not have to deal with something, that being his mum and sister. We find the lyrics to a song, presumably written by the old Korean war vet when he was a lookout. It's a song about wanting to escape from the problems of the world to a place where the birds and the bees won't know me. Perhaps hinting that the vet was also running from his issues, and maybe even the girls who decided to skinny dip in the middle of a forest and then go for a joyride in someone else's tractor are trying to escape something too. This desire to flee from your troubles is suggested in the end credits song titled I'd Rather Go Blind, in which Etta James expresses that she'd rather accept ignorance at any cost than deal with the pain caused by a heartbreak. But the game shows that ultimately there is no escaping from reality, and trying to run can only lead to more bad things happening. Henry's wife remains sick. He's still upset over it. As Delilah says, you came out to put your memories behind you, but they're still right there in front of you. By the end, there is the hint that he will visit Julia, showing that perhaps he's grown from his experience and decided to face his problems. After years of running away from her life, Delilah decides she'll no longer work for the forest. So maybe she too has experienced character development. Both of them didn't really do much in the way of keeping the forest safe, with the fire taking over indirectly due to their actions. I think this fire, which we see smoke from throughout before it eventually gets out of control, represents our problems. Always in the background, raging, we can try to ignore it, but it's still there, and eventually its negative effects will spread. Ned, meanwhile, still has to grapple with causing his son's death. This is something he can't accept, as shown by his message to Henry, in which he blames his son for his own death rather than taking responsibility for it. Ultimately, he causes a lot of harm in his refusal to accept the truth. Not only does he assault and stalk Henry, harasses the girls and commits arson, but in the end he doesn't grow and instead chooses to stay in the forest as he has done for the past 3 years. All of this shows the negative effects of running from your problems. Refusal to accept reality and trying to find means to avoid it are probably things that everyone has gone through at least a few times in their lives, so this aspect of Firewatch really resonated with me. But there's even more depth here than that. I think Henry's self-imposed isolation is brilliantly shown. Looking all around on the watchtower, you'll see mountains completely surrounding you, trapping you like 4 prison walls. Outside of the finale, when we enter Ned's cave and the end credits, we also don't see any other faces throughout. Henry has a picture of Julia, but her face is obscured by a camera. We only hear Delilah, the girls are too far to make out any details, and when we see Ned in the dark of night, it's just his silhouette. This makes the contact with Delilah all the more meaningful, and suggests just how much Henry has disconnected himself from the world. At the end though, we see him grab the hand of a helicopter pilot to get on board the chopper, something which I think signifies the end of his isolation. Firewatch also has a lot to say about change and loss, about the temporary nature of things. Our whole world as we know it can change from one minute to the next without any warning. Henry and Julia were happy together, they had so many plans, only for them to be torn apart by her horrible disease. Henry and Delilah seem to be all one another had for the duration of the game, but the ending suggests that they won't ever speak again. Delilah herself was in a happy relationship, then she wasn't. Ned had his son, but then he suddenly died. Even Dave and Ron's friendship seems to come to an abrupt end, with Dave just outright disappearing from Ron's life. What we take for granted one moment can just as soon not be there the next. People are always leaving our lives, people fall out, people move away, people die. The huge space they occupy suddenly goes, leaving perhaps a souvenir or two and the memory of them. At one point, Delilah tells us that people just disappear, and when Henry asks her if she thinks that's disconcerting, she replies that it's just life. Perhaps it is, but that doesn't make it any less sad. I think that melancholy is something that Firewatch captures very well, and it's for that and many other reasons that I think it's a great game. Just so we don't end on too depressing a note, I want to share something random that I've seen no one else point out. In the 1999 Eminem song My Fault, he mentions that he went to John's rave with Ron and Dave. While both common, perhaps the developers of Firewatch got the names for the 2 rangers from this song. I like to think that they are the same characters, and that somewhere between 1989 and 1999 they reconnected before going to a rave with Eminem.